The wind howled through the wreckage, carrying the scent of ash and snow. Emergency crews moved fast, voices loud and urgent, scanning the aftermath of a collapsed farmhouse on the edge of the evacuation zone. But in the middle of it all, amid the sirens and searchlights, she stood silent. A little girl, no more than 8, coat torn, cheeks streaked with soot. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She just held out a crumpled piece of paper in trembling hands. The soldiers barely noticed her until the K9, Rex, a retired military search dog, stopped dead in his tracks. His handler tugged the leash, confused. But the dog wouldn't move forward. Instead, he turned toward the girl and sat. It wasn't the drawing that made the dog freeze, it was what he saw in it. Something familiar. Something buried. The girl said nothing. But the dog already knew what they needed to find. The storm had passed, but the devastation it left behind stretched for miles. Trees were torn from the ground, homes flattened into splinters, and icy snow clung to every broken edge like a cruel decoration. The rescue crews had been working for 36 straight hours, searching, shouting, scanning for signs of life in the collapsed outskirts of the old logging community. Sergeant Nathan Cole trudged carefully over a buckled wooden beam, his military-issue boots crunching against ice-crusted debris. His K9 partner, Rex, a grizzled German shepherd with years of active service behind him, moved with precision. His nose dipped to the ground, following an invisible trail, tail stiff, every muscle in his body alert. "Nathan," a voice crackled over the comms. "Still no signs on thermal. We might be clear here." "Copy that," he replied, scanning the horizon. But Rex didn't stop. The dog pulled ahead, toward the skeletal remains of what once might have been a farmhouse. Smoke still rose from splintered boards, but the snow had already begun reclaiming the space, blanketing it like a secret being buried. That's when Nathan saw her. She stood beneath a twisted porch beam, not hiding, just waiting. A little girl, her hair tangled, her boots caked in mud and ash. Her coat was far too thin for the weather. She didn't cry. Didn't tremble. She didn't even look afraid. Instead, she held out a piece of paper. Crumpled. Torn. Rex froze, then stepped forward slowly. His ears twitched, and he let out a low, almost questioning whine. Nathan stepped in quickly, crouching down in front of the girl. "Hey," he said gently. "You okay? Are you hurt?" She said nothing. Instead, she extended the paper further, offering it to the dog, not the soldier. Nathan's brow furrowed. "What's your name?" Still no answer. Rex stepped forward again and sniffed the drawing, then sat down. Nathan glanced at the paper, then carefully took it from her. It was a child's sketch. Crude, drawn with what looked like a dull crayon. But the image was unmistakable. A house. A girl. A dog, big, with sharp ears. And beside them, a figure buried beneath scribbled lines of gray and black, like rubble or snow. A red X marked the lower right corner. Rex barked once. Loud. Sharp. The girl flinched slightly, then looked directly at the dog, her eyes locking with his. Something passed between them. Not fear. Not even grief. Recognition. Nathan stood up slowly and keyed his radio. "Command, this is Cole. We've got a live miner. She's unresponsive verbally, but conscious. No visible injuries. Also, I think she's trying to show us something." There was a pause. "Copy that, Cole. Medevac inbound to your location. Sit tight." Nathan looked down at Rex, then the girl. "Is this your house?" he asked, pointing to the image. Still nothing. He tried a different approach. "Where's your dog?" That made her look up at him, just for a second. She raised one small hand and pointed, behind him. Rex turned first. Then Nathan followed his gaze. The farmhouse was nothing but collapsed beams and twisted tin. But in the distance, behind it, a tree line thick with brush marked the start of a narrow gully. Nathan glanced at the drawing again. That red X. It wasn't on the house. It was in the woods. Rex took a step forward. Nathan hesitated. "Stay here," he said to the girl. But as he moved, she followed. Quiet as the snow falling around them. Rex led the way, paws crunching frozen soil. Nathan followed close, boots slipping slightly as the path narrowed. The air grew stiller, heavier, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Then Rex stopped. A cluster of branches had been swept aside, and beneath them, barely visible, was a pocket of space. Dug out. Reinforced with planks and tarps. A makeshift shelter. Nathan dropped to one knee and peered inside. And froze. There, curled in a blanket, was another child. A boy. Pale. Still. But breathing. "Get me a medic," Nathan shouted into his radio. "We've got another survivor." The girl said nothing. She simply walked to the edge of the shelter and crouched down beside her brother, resting her tiny hand on his shoulder. She still didn't cry. Didn't scream. But her eyes glistened as she looked at Rex. And Rex? He leaned forward and pressed his head gently against the boy's legs, as if to say, "I've got you." The shelter was cold, but it had been enough. The little boy, barely 5, was alive. Weak, dehydrated, and unconscious, but alive. His small chest rose and fell in shallow breaths beneath the worn thermal blanket. Nathan's voice barked commands into the radio, summoning medics, backup, and evac gear. Rex didn't move from his spot at the boy's side. His ears were perked, but his body was still, alert but careful. He knew the boy was fragile. He also knew, somehow, that this was who they were supposed to find. Nathan looked over his shoulder at the girl. She had crouched silently on the opposite side of her brother, her arms folded around her knees. Her hair was still matted with ash, and her face was blank, but her eyes never left the boy. Never blinked. "Can you tell me his name?" Nathan asked gently. No answer. He tried again. "Is he your brother?" She finally nodded, once. A flurry of movement behind them signaled the arrival of medics. They moved efficiently, assessing vitals and preparing the boy for extraction. One of them, a female corpsman named Andy, knelt beside the girl. "Sweetheart, are you okay? Are you hurt?" The girl looked at her, then back at Rex. "He's okay," she whispered finally. Her voice was thin, hoarse, like it hadn't been used in days. "But he won't wake up unless the dog stays." Andy paused. "You mean Rex?" She nodded. And somehow, no one questioned it. Rex, the battle-hardened K9, stayed low and calm as the boy was gently lifted onto a stretcher. When they began to move him up the hill, the girl followed without being asked, her hand never leaving the dog's fur. By the time they reached the clearing again, a medevac chopper was circling overhead. Rescue lights swept across the snow like spotlights searching for ghosts. The girl flinched slightly as the rotor blades thundered to life, but she held her ground. Nathan knelt beside her. "You're safe now. We're going to take you both somewhere warm." She glanced at Rex, then back at Nathan. "Can he come?" "He's not going anywhere." As the medics loaded the stretcher into the chopper, the girl climbed in and immediately reached for her brother's hand. The moment Rex leapt up beside them and lay down at their feet, the girl finally exhaled. Her shoulders slumped. Her eyes closed. She slept the whole flight back. Nathan rode beside them, eyes scanning the distant treetops. The drawing, the crumpled, soot-stained paper, was still tucked inside his vest pocket. He hadn't let go of it. Not yet. Because something about it had triggered Rex. Not just because of the dog in the picture, but because Rex had recognized something. Something deeper. Back at the triage center, the boy was rushed to intensive care. Doctors stabilized his vitals and began warming him through a slow hypothermia recovery protocol. The girl was taken to pediatric care, wrapped in warm blankets and given fluids. A social worker came in, but the girl wouldn't talk to her. She wouldn't talk to anyone. Except Rex. Rex was allowed in the room under special permission. Nathan had argued for it, hard. And the moment the dog lay beside the girl's hospital bed, her hand instinctively fell to his fur. That's when she whispered again. He drew it. Nathan, sitting nearby, looked up. The drawing, he asked. She nodded. My brother. He drew it when the roof came down. He said, if something happened to him, I should find someone. Show them. Nathan leaned forward. Show them what? She blinked slowly. Where he put the others. Nathan froze. Others? She nodded. Who? Kids. Nathan stood abruptly, heart hammering. He stepped out of the room and radioed Monroe, his team lead. We need to go back, he said. Now. There's more. The next morning, before the snow had melted, a specialized recovery unit returned to the forest site. The girl, her name now confirmed as Ellie, had marked the map herself, using her finger and a red crayon from the nurse's cart. The same X as in the drawing, but this time, there were 3 more. The team split up. And within the hour, they found them. 3 more makeshift shelters. 2 empty. 1 collapsed. But inside, huddled and weak, a 4th child was alive. Barely, but alive. The drawing hadn't been a message. It had been a map. A map only a dog could follow. The media caught wind of the second rescue within hours. News vans began lining the edge of the base, asking questions no one was ready to answer. The headlines weren't just about the blizzard anymore, they were about the children. And the drawing. And the dog who had somehow understood what no one else did. Nathan was summoned to a closed-door meeting with command. Charts, satellite photos, and transcripts were scattered across the table. A general leaned forward, tapping the photo of the drawing. How did this happen? Nathan didn't flinch. The girl's brother drew it before he passed out. He knew they'd be buried. He made her promise to show someone. And your dog, he responded to this? Yes, sir. Rex fixated on the drawing like it was a live signal. It led us to both survivors. The room went silent. Finally, the general spoke again, quieter. And she never screamed? No, sir. She didn't need to. That same day, Nathan returned to the pediatric wing. Ellie had been moved into a private room to recover more peacefully. Her brother, Noah, was still in the critical care unit but had stabilized. Monitors beeped rhythmically beside him. Nathan sat beside her bed. Rex lay at his usual post, his head resting on the edge of her mattress. You did good, Nathan said. Because of you, those kids are safe. Ellie looked up from the sketch pad in her lap. She'd begun drawing again, fiercely, like the images had been pent up too long. This one showed 4 children beneath a canopy of trees. Rex stood in the center of the page. She handed it to Nathan. I didn't do it, she whispered. He did. Nathan studied the image. The kids' faces were simple dots and lines, but the dog's figure was detailed, muscles, posture, even his eyes. She had drawn him from memory like someone who had been watching her protect her for years. Ellie, he said carefully, do you remember where your parents are? She hesitated, then shook her head. There were other grown-ups. They told us not to talk. Nathan leaned forward. Other grown-ups? They kept us in the woods. Moved us around. But Noah always made me draw. He said one day someone would understand. Rex lifted his head suddenly, ears perked. Nathan saw it instantly, his K9 was on alert. Within seconds, 2 MPs entered the room. "Sir, we've got movement at the fence line. Someone's watching the hospital. Multiple signals, no ID." Ellie flinched and curled up, drawing close to Rex. Nathan stood. "Lock this room down. I want Rex and one guard here, and I want a visual on whoever's out there." The MPs moved fast. As the building went into secure status, Nathan watched through the hallway window. A dark SUV had pulled off the main road. Inside it, 2 men sat unmoving. They didn't carry press badges. Didn't wave. Didn't get out. And they weren't waiting for answers. They were waiting for a window. Rex growled softly, low, protective. Ellie clung to his neck, whispering, "They're looking for the picture." That was all Nathan needed. He made the call. Within the hour, Ellie and Noah were placed in protective custody. Official statements labeled them critical witnesses. A federal task force arrived on site and took over the investigation into what was now believed to be a child trafficking operation hidden in the forest, disguised as a communal shelter. And the drawing, the crumpled paper that Rex had responded to, was now in an evidence bag inside a locked vault. Ellie stayed quiet through most of it. But when she saw the task force commander's patch, she tapped Nathan's arm and said, "That one." He looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" She pointed to the patch, the emblem of the unit. "That's the badge they made us draw. They said if anyone came, they were from that." Nathan's stomach dropped. Whoever held those kids knew exactly how to keep them hidden. But the plan had failed. Because one boy believed in his sister. And one dog listened to what no one else could hear. The move to federal custody was handled discreetly. Ellie and Noah were flown to a safe house under escort. Nathan personally oversaw the transfer, and Rex was approved to stay with them full-time. No one protested. In fact, one of the agents whispered, "That dog's done more than half our intel unit." The safe house was tucked deep in the Appalachians. Remote. Quiet. Secure. Ellie didn't say much during the ride. She stared out the window, her fingers brushing the soft fur behind Rex's ears. Noah was still recovering, but improving. His vitals were stable, and his first words upon waking were, "Did she find someone?" When told that Ellie had drawn her way to rescue, he smiled weakly. "I knew she would." The new home was small, just a few rooms, soft carpets, warm lamps. But the silence wasn't empty. It was safe. Ellie took to the corner of the main room and set up a small drawing space on her own. Notebooks. Crayons. Pencils. She began sketching faces. Dozens of them. She didn't remember names. But she remembered eyes. Hair. The way someone walked. She filled sheet after sheet with details only a child would notice, a chipped tooth, a lanyard that always smelled like bleach, a man who never smiled. The task force took every sketch seriously. They posted composites to a secure network, comparing them to missing persons databases. Within days, matches began appearing. One girl had gone missing from Oklahoma. A boy from Michigan. Another from Georgia. Every new match brought silence to the room. The FBI began cross-referencing Ellie's drawings with recovered field data. All signs pointed to an off-grid network of temporary learning retreats that were anything but educational. Each location operated for a few months, then relocated. The children were kept quiet, moved in groups, and told that the outside world was dangerous. They were made to draw when they were scared. It was therapy. But Ellie and Noah had used that therapy as a map. Nathan watched from the corner of the room as she drew. Rex stayed close to her, always lying nearby with his head on his paws, eyes alert. The dog barely slept. Nathan finally asked, "Why did Rex listen to you? When you held out that drawing, what made him stop?" Ellie looked up, surprised he hadn't figured it out. "He knew," she said simply. "He saw it before." Nathan frowned. "Saw what?" She pointed to the drawing again. This time, one from the earlier sketches, the one with the red X, the same X they'd found in the woods. "He was there. Before me. He's the one they didn't know was watching." And then it clicked. Rex had gone missing for 3 days on a failed recon mission 6 months ago, during training in the same state. He was found alone in the woods and returned to base without explanation, dehydrated and injured, but alive. They'd assumed he'd chased a scent. Got lost. But maybe he hadn't. Maybe he had found something. And waited for someone else to see it too. Nathan checked Rex's records again. The GPS tracker had gone dark in the exact region the shelters were later found. No one had thought to look closer then. He was just a dog, after all. But dogs didn't forget. And Rex had been waiting for a sign. A map. A girl who wouldn't scream, but would draw. Ellie looked back down at her newest page. This time, it was different. It wasn't a place. Or a face. It was a door. Iron. Bolted. With a number, 17. "Where is that?" Nathan asked gently. She shook her head. "I don't know. But it's where the quiet ones go." Nathan's blood ran cold. There were still more. Still hidden. But they weren't just finding faces anymore. They were finding doors. And Rex was already standing beside the next one. Nathan stood in front of the command screen, watching as Ellie's drawing of the bolted door was digitally scanned, enhanced, and matched against federal infrastructure databases. They'd tried every trick, comparing metal structures, cold storage units, even industrial bunkers. Nothing definitive. But then an analyst in Virginia pinged back. "We've got a partial match." Nathan leaned in. "There's an old civil defense storage facility, decommissioned since the 80s. Marked Building 17. Located in the Appalachian Corridor, less than 30 miles from where the kids were found." He felt his chest tighten. "Access records? Wiped. Ownership? Privately transferred to a shell company 2 years ago." It was enough. By morning, a tactical unit was deployed. Ellie wasn't told where they were going, but she knew. She drew a new picture that morning without prompting: trees bending in the wind, a low building half sunk into a hill, and 2 dogs. One was Rex. The other was smaller, thinner. Nathan knelt beside her. "Who's the second dog?" "He was there before me," she whispered. "He barked too much. They made him quiet." The convoy arrived at Building 17 just after sunrise. Fog clung low to the ground, and frost coated the metal handle of the compound's door. There were no markings. No cameras. Just silence. Nathan was part of the breach team. Rex was cleared to lead. "On your 6, came the whisper over comms. The door took longer than expected to crack. But when it opened, it creaked like something that hadn't breathed in years. What they found inside wasn't just criminal. It was methodical. Corridors lined with bunk cots. Stale food. No windows. Murals painted on walls, childlike, eerie. Paper chains and hand-scrawled rules. No crying. No yelling. Obey the quiet. And in the far chamber, a metal door marked simply Quiet Room. Rex led them straight there. His nose twitched. Then he barked once, deep and loud. Inside were 5 children. Dirty. Hungry. Curled up beneath thin sheets. They didn't scream. Didn't run. They just looked up, blinking like moles pulled from the dark. A medic moved in. "We've got live kids." Repeat, live. Ages range 4 to 11. Nathan lowered his rifle and knelt. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now." One child, a girl with matted blonde hair, reached for Rex. He let her. And for the first time in what felt like centuries, someone in that place cried. But it wasn't out of fear. It was relief. Back at the safe house, Ellie stared out the window for hours until the call came in. Nathan returned with mud on his boots and exhaustion in his eyes, but something else, too. A lightness that hadn't been there before. She didn't ask for details. She didn't have to. Rex trotted in behind him and went straight to her, licking her face like a pup. "You did it," Nathan said, voice hoarse. Ellie held out another drawing. This one had 7 kids, 5 new ones, 2 from before, all standing in the sunlight. The door behind them was gone. At the bottom, written in red crayon, were 3 words. "We're not quiet." Word of the rescue at Building 17 didn't make the news. It couldn't. The operation was classified, the children placed into protective care, and the compound immediately sealed. But within the walls of the safe house, something had changed. Ellie no longer drew cages or locked doors. Her pictures became brighter, still quiet, but filled with open skies and running feet. She started smiling again. Noah recovered slowly, regaining strength, and soon began speaking in full sentences. His first question to Nathan was about the dog. "Did Rex really come back for us?" Nathan knelt beside him. "He never left you. You just didn't know it yet." Noah nodded, solemn like a soldier. "I drew him so Ellie wouldn't forget." That afternoon, the two of them sat side by side at the kitchen table. Drawing. Coloring. 1 page at a time. Ellie worked quietly, but Noah explained each image. The room filled with the soft sound of crayons against paper. Rex lay nearby, his breathing steady. He never strayed far. Nathan stepped outside to take a call. "You're being reassigned," came the voice on the other end. "We want you to head up a new K-9 civilian trauma program. Focused on recovery through handler-companion pairing. Pilot starts in D.C." Nathan looked back at the house, at the window where 2 children sat drawing in the sunlight. "Can I bring Rex?" A pause. Then, it wouldn't work without him. When he walked back inside, Ellie looked up. "You're leaving?" Nathan hesitated. "I might be asked to take a new job. It would mean moving." She stood up. "Do we have to say goodbye?" He shook his head. "Not if you don't want to." She looked down at Rex. "Then we're going too." The officials agreed. There was no reason to separate them now. The bond between Rex and the children, especially Ellie, had become essential to their recovery. Therapists had noted remarkable changes in both kids' behavior when the dog was present: reduced anxiety, increased communication, improved sleep. So they moved together. The new facility in D.C. was part home, part lab, part school. Children from similar trauma backgrounds were invited in. Some barely spoke. Others flinched at every loud sound. But when they sat beside the dog, when they drew, whispered, or simply rested their heads against his side, something shifted. Rex had become more than a rescuer. He was a bridge. And Ellie? She became something else too. One day, a new girl arrived. Tiny. Curled into herself. She hadn't spoken a word in weeks. She wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Ellie walked over and sat beside her without speaking. She placed a box of crayons in the girl's lap and began drawing silently beside her. After a few minutes, the girl picked up a green crayon and drew a single flower. She didn't say anything. But Ellie looked at her, smiled, and said softly, "He understands." Rex came over and laid his head on the girl's foot. She didn't pull away. That moment sparked something larger. The center began recording their progress, and the federal task force began adapting the drawing therapy into part of a broader recovery model. The pilot program grew. Nathan found himself speaking at panels, explaining how a crumpled drawing changed the course of an investigation. How a girl who never screamed taught them more about strength than any textbook ever could. But he always said the same thing when asked why it had worked. Because a dog didn't need words to know what mattered. Ellie's story remained sealed from the public, but within their small circle, it lived on. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a signal. A whisper in the wind that finally got heard. As the seasons shifted, the center transformed into a sanctuary, not just of safety, but of voice. Children who had once been silenced began telling stories. Not all with words, some still couldn't speak of what had happened, but through drawings, sculptures, music. They built a language all their own. Ellie became a guide for the newer children. She wasn't much older than them, but her silence had given her fluency in theirs. When a child handed her a jagged drawing full of scribbles and shadows, she didn't ask, "What's this?" She simply sat beside them and began sketching something of her own, a tree, a bird, a sun. And in time, the other pictures changed too. Noah began writing. His first story was about the dog who followed the drawing. It had no dialogue, just a simple tale told through sketches and captions. His teacher cried when she read it. Nathan continued to lead the K-9 program, traveling to nearby shelters, schools, and law enforcement divisions to speak about how Rex helped unlock what trauma had sealed away. He didn't do it for attention. He did it because people needed to believe it was possible to hear someone without sound. To follow a child's drawing like it was a map. But Rex was growing older. His steps were slower, his naps longer. He still perked up when a new child arrived, always alert and patient. But everyone knew he was nearing the end of his journey. One day, Ellie was drawing beside him in the garden, a quiet spot just outside the center's art wing, when she paused and looked at Nathan. "Do you think he ever missed us before we found him?" Nathan sat down beside her, smiling. "I think he waited for you." Ellie nodded. "I think I waited for him too." That night, she left a folded drawing under Rex's blanket. No one saw what was inside. But in the morning, Rex didn't get up. He was lying peacefully, head on his paws, as if still watching the door. The staff let Ellie and Noah say goodbye in their own time. She didn't cry. She just knelt beside him, smoothed his ears, and whispered something no one else could hear. Nathan stood at the doorway, hand clenched at his side, eyes brimming. When Ellie finally stood, she walked over and pressed the folded drawing into Nathan's hand. He opened it later, alone. It was a picture of Rex, not as an old dog, but young, full of energy. Running across a hilltop under open skies. Behind him were dozens of kids. All of them running too. And at the bottom, one line written in red crayon. "He found all of us." The center held a quiet ceremony for Rex that Sunday. There were no uniforms. No medals. Just kids in mismatched coats, holding drawings instead of flowers. They each walked past a wooden box resting beneath the old maple in the courtyard and left a picture. Some were of Rex running, some sleeping, one drawn entirely in blue crayon showing a storm and a single paw print. Noah stood beside Nathan, both of them silent as Ellie stepped forward. She carried the first drawing, the one that started it all. Crumpled. Torn. Faded. The one she had held out without words when everything else was gone. She didn't place it in the box. She unfolded it and pinned it to the tree. "He started with this," she said quietly. "So this is where he stays." Nathan cleared his throat, trying not to let the emotion break through. He saved more people than most soldiers ever get the chance to. He did it without rank. Without praise. Just because someone needed him. The wind moved gently through the trees, fluttering the edges of the pinned drawing. For a moment, no one spoke. Then a small voice from the back whispered, "Thank you, Rex." And another added, "He was my first friend." A chain of quiet acknowledgments followed, each child stepping forward not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. Because for once, their voice could be heard. The center built a small garden around the tree in the following weeks. It became known as the drawing tree. New children were brought there first, before intake, before paperwork. They were given a sheet of paper and a box of crayons and asked to draw anything they wanted. The results were astonishing. Some drew dogs. Others, doors. Some scribbled endlessly in black. But every picture was received without judgment. They were taped to the branches, the bench, the trunk, until the tree became a living mosaic of pain, recovery, and hope. One evening, Nathan walked by and found a child sitting alone under the branches. She had drawn nothing but a blue sky. No sun. No people. Just endless blue. When he asked her about it, she shrugged. "That's where I go when I don't want to be scared." He looked at the paper again. "You're not scared now, though, are you?" She paused, then pointed at Rex's tree. "Because he's watching." The center continued to grow. Therapists, law enforcement, educators, they came to learn how a drawing and a dog could unravel years of silence. And while no program was perfect, this one worked because it didn't start with questions. It started with trust. And a quiet presence that didn't demand words. Ellie eventually began leading group sessions. Not formally, she was still just a kid, but when new arrivals saw her sitting cross-legged beside the drawing tree, they instinctively joined her. She didn't say much. She just handed them crayons. And when they finished, she always asked one thing. "Can I show it to him?" Then she'd point at the sky. Years passed. The center became a model for dozens more like it across the country. Drawing trees appeared in city shelters and rural clinics. Specially trained dogs were paired with trauma recovery teams. Ellie's first drawing was turned into a symbol, printed quietly in corners of children's advocacy documents and quietly etched into the collar tags of new K-9 recruits. But none of that happened overnight. Ellie, now nearly a teenager, still kept Rex's old collar on a shelf by her bed. She never replaced him. Never asked for another dog. Rex hadn't been a pet, he had been a compass. A guardian. Something too sacred to duplicate. Nathan watched over her like a silent uncle. He'd taken an official leadership role with the Trauma/K9 initiative and had less time at the center, but he always returned when it mattered. Like when new kids arrived and no one else could reach them. Or when Ellie's nightmares came back. One night, during a spring thunderstorm, he found her sitting awake under the window, knees pulled to her chest, sketchbook clutched tightly in her lap. "Bad dream?" he asked. She nodded, wiping her eyes. "What did you draw?" She hesitated, then turned the page. It wasn't a nightmare. It was a building, cold and gray, with no doors or windows. Around it were little red X's, dozens of them. "I think there's more," she whispered. "Like the place before." Nathan crouched down, alert. "Do you remember where this is?" She shook her head. "I don't. But someone does. I think they need help." Over the next week, she drew more images, bits of terrain, strange fences, worn signs. Nathan and the analysts pieced together a potential region deep in the Dakotas, land previously used for military storage and now privately leased under another shell company. When asked how she knew all this, Ellie simply said, "Someone else drew it first. I'm just finishing it." No one questioned her anymore. A reconnaissance team was deployed. They found the compound. Underground. Shielded. Nearly inaccessible without special tools. Inside were 15 children. All of them silent. All of them drawing. The oldest one handed the agent a torn paper with Rex's name written across the top. When Ellie heard the news, she stood by the drawing tree in silence. Then she reached for her notebook and began a new sketch. This one showed Rex again. Not watching over just her, but everyone. Children she hadn't met. Places she hadn't seen. And beneath it, in bold letters, she wrote, "He still listens." It began with one drawing, held out in silence. But it ended with hundreds more, spread across cities and homes and quiet shelters, like breadcrumbs leading lost souls back to safety. The drawing tree in D.C. became a living memorial. On the anniversary of Rex's passing, children and adults gathered with folded papers, not just to remember, but to continue the story. Each image hung like a whisper that had finally found its voice. Ellie stood among them, now nearly grown. Her hair longer, her posture stronger, but her eyes still carried the weight of everything they had seen. She wore a thin chain around her neck. At its end hung a piece of Rex's first collar tag. Polished smooth from years of her thumb brushing it for comfort. Noah stood beside her, taller now, carrying a satchel filled with blank pages and fresh crayons. Not for himself, but for others. He'd become a counselor in training, focused on art therapy for trauma-affected youth. His soft voice made people feel safe without even trying. Nathan approached from behind, gray now at the temples. He smiled as the two turned. "He'd be proud of you both." Ellie smiled gently. "He still is. I think, he never stopped." She motioned to the tree. Hundreds of drawings flapped in the breeze, some old and worn, others fresh and bright. There were pictures of Rex. Of doors. Of blue skies. Of kids holding hands. Of trees without cages. Of homes that didn't need hiding. And on one low branch, a laminated print of the very first crumpled drawing. Faded but protected. Framed in a quiet kind of reverence. Nathan stepped closer. "Do you want to tell your story publicly now?" Ellie looked at him. "Not all of it. It was never just mine." He nodded. "Then how do you want it told?" She turned to a group of younger kids who had just arrived at the center for the first time. They stood near the base of the tree, some nervous, others withdrawn. But Ellie walked to them and knelt down, opening her satchel. She handed each of them a blank page. "Start here," she said. "Draw what you feel. Not what you think we want to see." One small boy looked up. "Will he see it?" She paused, then nodded. "Yes. He's listening." A soft wind blew through the branches. The drawings swayed like sails on anchored ships. And for a moment, it didn't feel like a therapy center. It felt like a cathedral. A sacred place where what had once been unspeakable could finally be spoken. Through lines. Through color. Through memory. Through silence. And in that silence, something else lived. Not fear. But faith. In a girl who didn't scream. In a dog who didn't bark. In a story told through drawings. And in the truth that even the quietest cry for help could still echo, if someone was willing to follow it. All the way home.